I'm Claire Harvey. I'm the editorial director of The Australian and host of our daily news podcast, The Front. And I'm joined by Ellie Dudley, our legal affairs correspondent, to talk about the Bruce Lehrmann defamation trial. It's now wrapped up in the federal court in terms of evidence and submissions. And now Justice Michael Lee has gone, he said, to the Central Coast for a bit of a holiday and then deep into his chambers to write what I think is going to be an epic judgment. This judge is famous for giving verdicts off the bench, reading out his verdict, sometimes even at the end of submissions and evidence. He didn't do that this time, Ellie. He's gone away to write his judgment. What's your assessment of Justice Michael Lee from what we've seen of him during the trial?
It's really, Justice Michael Lee is an incredible judge to watch, right? Because occasionally he'll ask a question or sort of make a comment that just gives you a little window into what he's thinking, just a little window into his mind, which has been very helpful when he, might just ask one question of Brittany Higgins or one question of Bruce Lehrmann. We also know, towards the end there, he made those comments basically saying that both Brittany Higgins and Bruce Lehrmann are, unreliable witnesses, that they have inconsistencies in their evidence. So that was a huge indication from Justice Lee as to where his head is at. The other thing that we have to mention is that he's very entertaining. he loves to make a joke from the stand. He loves to make, a pop culture reference, all that sort of stuff. So he's very entertaining to watch, and he, sort of banters with the defence counsel. And anyway, he's very fun to watch, and he's been a great judge.
Yeah, he seizes on these little nuggets that kind of become obsessions. Like, for example, David Sharaz, Brittany Higgins' partner, who was the person who first reached out to the project and pitched what he called a Liberal Party Me Too project pitch. And then was present at the pre-interview that she did with the project. He's really been the architect of this story coming out in public. The judge really wanted to know where he was. Right at the beginning of the trial, he said, "So where is Mr. Sharaz? Are you not calling him?" And then during the defence's closing submissions, the judge indicated that he said he's like Elijah. He's like the prophet Elijah. There's always a seat for him at the table, but he never shows up. And he really dug into the what he was to make of the David Sharaz influence over the project's storytelling. In Lisa Wilkinson's evidence, he asked her directly, do you think it's appropriate for a very vulnerable person, someone who's saying that they're a survivor of sexual assault, for their story to be intermediated by someone else, a boyfriend, in other words?
And why don't you think that David Sharaz was present? Why didn't he come to the table?
It's such a mystery. Both the barristers for Network 10 and Lisa Wilkinson said in court that there was no forensic advantage in calling him. That's a fancy way of saying we think it wasn't good for our case. And really that can be the only reason why they didn't call him. The Bruce Lehrmann side could have called him. And again, the only reason not to do that is that you don't think it's going to help. Presumably, he would have come into the witness box and said a whole lot of really emotive stuff about how devastated Brittany Higgins had been by the rape, how she first told him about it, how she cries herself to sleep at night. That's not good for Bruce Lehrmann's case. Yeah, it's really intriguing that given he was pivotal in the production of the project, they haven't called him.
Yeah, and we heard all the comments that he made during that, multi-hour long pre-interview that was had between Lisa Wilkinson, Angus Llewellyn, Brittany Higgins and David Sharaz. Him talking about his friend Katie Gallagher in Labor, him talking about wanting to, time this interview with question time, talking about Labor friendlies who would be able to grill the coalition over, with questions over the alleged cover-up of Brittany Higgins' alleged rape. So he does seem to be quite a pivotal character in all of this. All the text messages that Brittany Higgins and David Sharaz sent to one another in the lead up to the interview going to air, talking about this, political missile that they, wanted to launch against the coalition. So I don't know, as a viewer and as a reporter, it was disappointing that he didn't take the stand. I would have liked to hear from him. I don't know.
He's definitely front and centre off field, isn't he?
Yeah.
They've famously, just before Christmas, moved to France.
Yep.
And,
must be nice.
And were photographed at the airport in all white outfits, got off the plane in all black outfits, and then arrived at their French country estate in all beige outfits, including with a beige dog, which I thought was A great touch.
Yeah, perfect.
How do you think that has played for 10? Do you think the barristers for 10 would have been happy to see Brittany Higgins moving to France?
It's interesting, isn't it? I think that, obviously there were discussions about whether or not Brittany Higgins would be recalled to the stand. That was a big point that was made sort of earlier in the case. She wasn't in the end, after that secret recording was leaked between a recording of Leon's wire, Brittany Higgins' lawyer, and again her fiancé, David Sharaz. She wasn't recalled to the stand. So at that point, I think that she was like, all right, well, I'm off I go. Her and David Sharaz have moved to that little French village that we've all now seen photos of. Whether or not it hurts their case, I don't really know. I don't necessarily think that they would. Oh no, maybe they would. Maybe they would be probably disappointed that she hasn't stuck around, that she hasn't seen it through to the end, and that she's sort of been like, all right, well, I'm out now. That's me done. I'm off to France.
The interesting other thing about David Sharaz and Brittany Higgins is that they seem to have got themselves into a feud with Lisa Wilkinson halfway through the trial. In her evidence, Lisa Wilkinson was asked those questions about by the judge. Were you good friends with David Sharaz? Was it appropriate for him to sign off an email to you with much love? And she essentially said no. Yeah. David Sharaz then fired back on Instagram, saying he had a habit of referring to friends and acquaintances as friends. And then, there was a bit of unfollowing that went on, wasn't there?
Yeah, I think Lisa unfollowed him, he unfollowed Lisa. But then Brittany has gone and defended Lisa on her Instagram stories as well, posting photos that she's, sort of reposting photos that she's previously posted of her and Lisa, writing statements saying that, she still supports Lisa as a journalist, all those sort of things. So, look, there has clearly been a bit of a weird feud going on between the three of them. But again, it just shows that David Sharaz is smack bang in the middle of all of these things and yet, wasn't called to the witness box. So I guess we might not ever hear from him as he settles into his new life in the south of France. So
Lisa Wilkinson has been the one person, apart from Bruce Lehrmann, who has attended court every single day. In a series of pantsuits that are
brightly coloured
pretty
pantsuits.
Impressive. She looks great.
She does.
So she didn't have to come every day. No one from Network 10 has come. There hasn't been a Network 10 CEO or the EP of the project showing up in court every day, even though they are also a defendant in this matter. How do you think Lisa Wilkinson performed when she was in the witness box?
She was very eloquent. You can tell that she spent a lot of time on TV. She's able to sort of take things as they're thrown at her. She did occasionally become a little bit combative, I would say. Just, there was that time that she snapped at Bruce Lehrmann's barrister, Matthew Richardson, and said, don't make me out to be a cheap tabloid journalist, Mr. Richardson. So things like that, she's eager to defend herself. And I think that her rocking up to court every day was indicative of the fact that she wanted to seem like she stood by her journalism. She's clearly very invested in this case. This is, the biggest story of her career. She wants to be in court every day to see how this entire thing's pan out. But as far as optics go, it's important for her to be there to show that she stands by her journalism. Her
role in the production of the project is interesting.
Yeah.
So she was the person who David Sharaz first reached out to. She told Angus Llewellyn, the producer, I have a big story about a cover-up of a rape. So she framed it right from the beginning as a cover-up, and that she was the central person. She was bringing in this story. Those two things, her own barrister in submissions to the judge said were not right. That there was no cover-up, even though Lisa Wilkinson thought there was, and that Lisa Wilkinson was actually not the driving force. That although she brought in the story, she wasn't responsible for the final choices, including the script that she read out. So, that must not have been easy to hear for Lisa Wilkinson.
Yeah, absolutely, to hear that huge backtrack. But I guess that it was a gamble that, or not even a gamble necessarily, but it was necessary for Lisa Wilkinson's barrister to say that, to try and redirect the conversation of the trial back to, the key matters at stake. If you go through and you read the statement of claim for Bruce Lehrmann, there's not really anything in there that says, Network 10 said that there was a political cover-up and there wasn't a political cover-up, because he doesn't care about that. It's not Fiona Brown or Linda Reynolds that are suing, it's Bruce Lehrmann that's suing. He cares about whether or not this rape occurred and cares about whether or not he was treated fairly in this interview with Brittany Higgins on the project on Network 10. So I think that while it must have been incredibly frustrating for Lisa Wilkinson to sit there and hear her barrister say that, it was necessary to redirect the trial back in that direction. I think the other thing that was interesting was hearing Lisa, I guess, bat away questions about whether or not she should have gone back to Brittany Higgins with further questions once they received a response from Parliament, or once they saw correspondence from Parliament. What did you think about that, about Lisa Wilkinson, I guess, putting it on her producers that it was their responsibility to deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I had some sympathy for the fact that she was hosting other episodes of the project at the time. She had other stuff going on. And, clearly she's not an experienced investigative journalist. That's not what Lisa Wilkinson does. She is an outstanding television presenter. That's her role. She's been an outstanding magazine editor. She's just taken a different path. And so what the project did, rightly, was engage an investigative journalist, Angus Llewellyn, to do the investigation. Yeah. And he really did. He made a huge amount of phone calls. He asked most of the right questions, it would seem. Although there were some things he just didn't dig into. And interestingly, those are the things where it was Lisa Wilkinson's instincts to keep pushing. Angus Llewellyn kind of brushed those aside, like, for example, the photograph of the bruise. Brittany Higgins presented them with a photograph of the bruise that seemed to be a screenshot taken from her phone that very morning in January 2021, nearly 2 years after the alleged rape. And it was only Lisa Wilkinson who was like, that's a bit odd. How has she got this photo? And she's telling us that everything else on her phone doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. And she pushed Angus Llewellyn to keep asking questions. I think at one point she said that Brittany appeared to be avoiding this, interrogation of her phone records. She had multiple stories about, initially that Parliament or the government wiped her phone, but then she lost it because she had multiple phones. So it was Lisa who was the one who was pushing and prodding on that point, but ultimately the point just wasn't prodded enough.
The thing that she did do in the witness box was argue a lot with Matthew Richardson, the counsel for Bruce Lehrmann, and I don't think that impressed the judge.
No, I don't think so.
It's not a forum to make speeches, or and in fact the judge told several witnesses, including her, to stop making speeches.
Yeah, that was another marker of, I think, Justice Lee presiding over this case, was that he, on so many occasions, just said, stop making speeches, answer the question. Too. I think Brittany got a few of those. I can't remember if Bruce did. Lisa definitely did. There was definitely a few of those comments made from Justice Lee. There
was even an exchange when both Justice Lee and Sue Chrysanthu, Lisa Wilkinson's senior counsel, were telling her to stop talking. Yeah. What she wanted to say was, I've only ever met David Sharaz once. And the reason, she thinks that sounds good because it's like, well, I had nothing to do with this guy who you, the judge, might think is a bit dodgy. Yeah. That Sue Chrysanthu knew that's not a good thing to say, because it makes you look like you've accepted the Liberal Party Me Too project pitch from someone you don't even know.
Yeah, absolutely. Except, again, even in that email, David Sharaz referring to her as a good friend and signing off much love. So, I don't know, I guess the relationship between Lisa Wilkinson and David Sharaz will remain a mystery. Can we talk about, Justice Lee's comments towards the end, which I mentioned earlier, saying that both Brittany Higgins and Bruce Lehrmann have inconsistencies in their story. What sort of window do you think that provides for us as to what he's thinking and what his judgment might look like? Yeah,
I mean, I think, the question he'll be grappling with at Woy Woy or wherever he's going, it will be how, they've both lied.
Yep.
They've both lied in the witness box about little things and big things, potentially, at various points in the whole saga, so including in the criminal trial and now and in police interviews. Which of those lies are real and which are inconsequential? The defendant's case is that they absolutely had sex, that there can be no doubt that they went into that room for the purpose of having sex. Why else would they go to Parliament House in the middle of the night? They're both 23. A witness said they were pashing and touching each other at the bar. It's obvious.
Yeah.
Bruce Lehrmann's counsel, of course, says, well, that's not obvious. They didn't have sex. Bruce Lehrmann went into the office, did a little bit of work, picked up his keys and left. So if Bruce Lehrmann has lied and they did have sex, but he believed it was consensual, or Brittany Higgins didn't say no or say stop, The judge then asked a lot of probing questions about the barristers. Well, then, what do I do with that? If I do find that they did have sex, and the answer from Matt Collins for Network 10 was, well, Your Honour, we would lose. So Bruce Lehrmann would win this defamation case, but you should award him no damages.
Yeah.
And he mentioned a penny or $10, as in previous cases have been awarded when a judge finds that a plaintiff has lied. So, yeah, I mean, there were a few other inconsistencies in his story, though, that came out in the witness box, weren't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to your point about the, whether or not they had sex, didn't have sex, is there a world where Justice Lee comes back and said, all right, they had sex, she didn't say no, but she was really drunk and so therefore she couldn't consent? Is that something, obviously there's been many question marks over whether or not she was really drunk that night. We've all seen the CCTV footage of her sort of skipping through Parliament House, walking well and truly unassisted, but also struggling to put her shoes on. Her saying that she's 10 out of 10 drunk. We heard from a toxicology expert saying that she was incredibly drunk. Seeing her, scull multiple drinks at the Dock Hotel, again on CCTV. Is there a world where, they had sex, she didn't say no, but she wasn't able to consent?
Absolutely. And Sue Chrysanthu put quite a remarkable hypothesis to the judge, which is that maybe in the initial days after the alleged assault, Bruce Lehrmann was asked by his boss what happened, and he said nothing, and kind of he lost his job because he'd breached security. That was kind of the end of it. But then once Brittany Higgins went public, and significantly there was a Four Corners episode that aired in which a security guard said she was incredibly drunk. Sue Chrysanthu's hypothesis, which is a little bit cheeky, it's pretty out there, was that Lehrmann went to his then criminal lawyers, a pair of Canberra criminal lawyers, and Chrysanthu said, good criminal lawyers don't let an accused person say anything before they get to talk. So the lawyer sets out a whole bunch of stuff. Don't tell me anything until I've told you this.
Yeah.
And Chrysanthu said, they're good lawyers. They would have said, mate, if she was really drunk, she can't consent, right? And Chrysanthu's hypothesis is that Lehrmann then maintained the lie, doubled down on the lie, because if he had been tempted to say, yeah, like we had sex, she was consenting, she was kissing me, she was touching me, she came back to Parliament with me to have sex, he realised at that moment, this is Sue Chrysanthu's hypothesis, that was a bad thing to say, because he would be convicted.
Yeah. And so at that point, decided to say, right, well, no sexual intercourse occurred at all. Again, is what Sue Chrysanthu is asserting. We did see on the witness, when he was in the witness box, there were multiple inconsistencies in his evidence. I think a big glaring one for me was him saying that he didn't ever buy Brittany Higgins alcohol that night. He has maintained that he only ever bought drinks for himself and one of his fellow Liberal staffers. But then we watched him, sort of squirm in the witness box as we saw CCTV footage played of him buying Brittany Higgins not one but two drinks that night. The other thing that was, I guess, quite inconsistent about that evidence was that he's given bank statements to the court showing that he spent only $16 that night at the pub. Now we've seen him buy at least 5 drinks on CCTV footage, and it was put to him by Dr. Matt Collins, Network 10's barrister. Well, how are you affording 5 drinks for $16? A trendy pub in Canberra on a Friday night. Don't think that you can buy 5 drinks for $16. At which point Bruce Lehrmann said, well, that's your opinion. And I don't think the judge would have liked that very much, because I think it's you can pretty objectively say it's not an opinion that you can't buy 5 drinks for $16 at a pub. So that sort of stuff, I think there was a big inconsistency in his evidence that night. Obviously, we heard throughout the trial, as we heard, we've heard previously, that he has given multiple different stories to different people about why he returned to Parliament House that night. He told parliamentary security guards that he was there on official business for Minister Reynolds. He told his boss, Fiona Brown, that he went back there to drink whiskey. He's now saying that he went back there to pick up his keys. Is sort of his final story, that he went and picked up his keys and then annotated some question time briefs that night. So that sort of stuff doesn't make him out to be a particularly reliable witness either. So look, there have been multiple consistencies in his evidence, but as there have been in hers.
He's also claimed that he might have had a second phone, or he did have a second phone. Sue Chrysanthou said, well, maybe that's the phone on which he called his girlfriend after she called him 6 times in the period when he was inside Parliament House. Sue Chrysanthou says, well, the reason he didn't pick up the phone, this guy who's obsessed with his phone, is always looking at his phone, is that he was having sex with Brittany Higgins. Yes, and there were serious inconsistencies in Brittany Higgins' evidence, and the defence admits that. They say, there are serious credit issues with her as well.
And I think that was the difference I think I saw between the inconsistencies that came from Bruce Lehrmann's evidence and the inconsistencies in Brittany's, is that she was, for the most part, or at least on a few different inconsistencies, was pretty happy to admit, yes, I got that wrong in the criminal trial. So with things like where she got the bruise on her leg, in the criminal trial, in Bruce Lehrmann's criminal trial, she was adamant that the bruise came from being raped. Whereas she has admitted now, okay, yes, no, I can't be 100% for sure certain that bruise came from getting raped. It could have happened when I fell up the stairs that night. And obviously we know that bruise, the photo of that bruise, was used as part of the project interview to prove that she was raped that night.
And the criminal trial.
But her sitting there and saying, no, I admit that I could have gotten that wrong. It could have happened during the rape, or it could have happened when I fell up the stairs. The difference between her admitting that sort of thing versus Bruce getting backed way into a corner until he has nowhere to go other than to say, all right, yeah, okay, I got it wrong. I must have bought her drinks that night. I'll be interested to see how Justice Lee finds that.
Well, I can't wait for the verdict. I can't wait to read the reasons and discuss it with you. We'll see you in the new year.